They are frightening beings to behold. And so that's probably part of the other reason that the shepherds were terrified. And not only are angels terrifying, in a lot of ways, God can be too.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. My name is Jesse Mayer. I will be your host, and welcome Zac Peake, our Salty Pastor for the day, or what did we call you last time? Our sea salt.
I'll be Himalayan salt.
Himalayan salts, yes.
I like the mountains.
I can't keep track of all of the different spices we bring on here, but we definitely have a lot of spice, and we are so excited. Everyone who is listening only on our podcast, you won't be able to see this, but we have a brand new desk that was made by a very, very special volunteer here at Foothills named Jerry Anderson. He made this amazing desk that has this TV mounted in it, so we feel so special and blessed that he decided to put some time and craftsmanship into creating something so amazing for the podcast and for Foothills, because we use this studio for a lot of different things. So if you're only a listen-only person, just tune in once for the podcast just so you can check out our new desk. But we are so thankful to Jerry and everything he's done. But enough with that. We have Zac Peake here. It is Christmas time. We are in the middle of our series, Jesus is Christmas. And Zac, what are you preaching about this week?
Well, I was a little bit confused last Sunday because I got sent the basic outline of what Pastor Peake wants me to preach on for this Sunday, and then he started preaching on Sunday, and I was like, "This is a very similar outline." Like,
he just really wants to reinforce the point.
But thankfully, he brought in a little bit of Matthew. We're not in Matthew. We're just going to be in that Luke chapter 2. We touched on it this last week, and now we're going to dive a little bit deeper into it. He was opening the series, and so he was kind of covering a little bit of everything, a little bit higher level, that 30,000
casting vision of where we're going, right?
Yeah, and we're going to get a little bit more specific about Jesus, about joy, and about some of these more specific things, and about how that actually works in the context of our relationship with Christ. That's what we're going to be doing this week, and a little bit with Christmas.
I kind of love Christmas. I'm so excited for just celebrating Christmas. The church just takes on a different energy around Christmas time. The world as a whole does, right? Like there's a different kind of, it's not necessarily true authentic joy that you get from Jesus, but there's a definite increase in just general excitement around Christmas. And so it's always great. And
it's cool that it's such a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
Too,
you see this, and Pastor Doug talked about this on the podcast last week, that, even non-believers over in Arabian countries still celebrate Christmas for not the best reasons, commercialism and stuff, but they still get excited about Christmas. And so we're just wanting to keep the focus on why we are excited about Christmas, which is Jesus, right? So you said we were in Luke 2 today? Yeah.
We're going to be in Luke chapter 2. We're going to talk a little bit about the opening to it, where it goes, anybody who's read the Christmas story will recognize there's the census. Caesar Augustus says the census should be taken, and Joseph and Mary go to Bethlehem, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we really want to pick up kind of what happens once they're there and once Jesus is born. We can just jump in right now. Anybody who's read the Christmas story, this will sound really familiar. Start in verse 1. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world, and everyone went to their own town to register. Joseph went from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David. We know that's all familiar to us. He went there to register with Mary, who he was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. And then this is what we really want to focus on this week. This is kind of the pivotal part of the story that we're going to be taking our attention to. In verse 8, it says, "And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified." So I want to start right there. We talked last Sunday about how fear, it can kill our joy. Fear causes us to behave in a lot of ways and do a lot of actions that take us away from experiencing the joy of Christ. And here we see when an angel shows up to the shepherds, what happens? They are terrified. They are overcome with fear. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." So I want to take a second to focus on the fear and then the defeating of that fear and where the joy comes in. Because we see these shepherds are terrified, and they're terrified for a couple different reasons. One of them is because, they're just out with the flocks at night and something shows up in the sky and starts talking to them.
Right.
Which that is definitely a little creepy. If you were out camping in the mountains, and you're sitting around the fire, it's 10, it's gotten dark, it's nice, you're just hanging out talking, and then a light appears in the sky and starts talking to you, you're gonna be a little freaked out.
Well, I mean, people get freaked out just by being in their tents, and they constantly think bears are coming to get them,
Yeah.
right? You hear a snap of a twig out there, and it's
you're like,
they
oh my
were
gosh.
They were used to being outside, but it's they're still on high alert. That's why they're out there, is to protect the flocks, right?
Yeah.
And so it's they're already kind of amped up, but then just like every quote unquote UFO sighting or whatever, you start seeing lights in the sky, then it really it's contradictory to what you are expecting in a peaceful night.
Expecting a light to appear in the sky, an angel to appear in the sky and start talking to you.
Yes.
There's another reason they're terrified, though, and we can know this from the Old Testament a lot. Angels are scary. We have a great idea in Western culture of angels looking like these, very, very white people with these nice flowing robes that have a nice little halo. They're playing the harp. They sit on your shoulder.
They're so calm, cherub
exactly.
style, very, very peaceful.
Yeah, and that's not an angel. When you read in the Old Testament, I think one of my favorite encounters is the book of Daniel. Daniel is in the kingdom of Babylon. He's doing his thing, and an angel shows up to talk to him. And there's a couple men with him that run out of the room. And the way Daniel describes it, he's like, I couldn't stand anymore because my knees were so weak. This guy, and he's described, I can't remember exactly how it is, but he's this 20-foot tall guy, who looks like he's made of bronze with a sword. He's got
they're warriors, right? For the most part, every instance we see of angels in the Bible, contrary to the Western culture's view of them, they're the warriors. They are not meek, mild kings. They're like Avengers, but even bigger, even scarier, even more empowered. Yeah,
they are frightening beings to behold, and so that's probably part of the other reason that the shepherds were terrified. And not only are angels terrifying, in a lot of ways, God can be too. And I think this is something that we don't often recognize. We can talk about how, we can be afraid of this world, and yes, that can kill our joy. Or we can be afraid of what might happen to us, or afraid of, financial things, or, really anything in this world can cause us fear and insecurity. And that can take away our joy. But there's something else that's scary, and that is kind of getting closer to God. God, when it's so interesting when you read the Old Testament, there's a part where I believe it's Moses says, God, I want to see you. I want to see who you are. I want to see you. And it's interesting because earlier and I believe it's the same passage, it describes, the Old Testament describes how Moses talked to God as a friend talks to his friend face to face.
Right.
And so it's Moses has this relationship with God. He knows him.
He's already very close. He's closer with God than basically anybody before him.
Exactly.
Short of Adam, basically, in the garden.
But then Moses is like, I want to see you in all your glory. And God's like,
nah.
No, you can't. Moses is like, well, why not? I thought we were buddies. And God's like, oh, because you'll die.
Would you like to be vaporized today?
Would you like to cease to exist?
You can come be with me sooner than you're supposed to if you really want to.
Yeah, exactly. And so he has Moses stand in this crack of this mountain, and he goes by in all of his glory. And it describes how Moses can, feels this shaking and this power. And then when the Lord is a ways off, he comes out of the crack and just sees behind him. And even that has a profound impact.
Well, because
on
he
him.
comes down from the mountain glowing after that experience. Like
Yeah,
he's literally like his face is glowing just from
He has to put like
the
a shroud over. Yeah.
just
so
from the
that-
train of his glory, which is
Yes.
basically just the vapor waves
Yeah.
of God. And that was enough to basically transform Moses.
And I think it's really important for us to take away. And what I really want to focus on with this scripture is that God is terrifying too. When we first encounter him, he is scary. He's the creator of the universe. He is perfection. He is goodness incarnate. He is so many things that are wonderful and beautiful and also very scary at the same time. I'm sure we've all had experiences where we went into a situation that was good. Maybe it's when you went to, you wanted to go to maybe a dream college or something. And, it was a really good school and you got in and you show up that first day and it's a good thing, but you're a little scared.
But it's also terrifying.
Yeah. Or I'm sure, with you being out on tour, and all your dancing, I'm sure there were times where,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's scary and it's a good thing, but it's still scary. It's still tough. And that's only amplified with God because he is so good. I played sports in high school and there were times where, the first day showing up to practice, especially the first day, I was part of the high school team. That's an intimidating thing because you recognize that, that you're in this new level. You're like, okay, the game is going to be raised and I got to step up. And there's that insecurity inside you, which can cause fear. And it's only a lot more with the Lord.
Right.
Because he is much, much better than the JV football team that I was trying to play for. So, yeah, but there's so many reasons the shepherds were terrified. And there's a lot of reasons in our lives that we can be terrified of the Lord. We can be afraid of the way he will change us. He can be afraid, or we can be afraid of what he may ask us to leave behind for him, the ways he will mold and shape our lives. I remember in high school, at me and like everybody else in the youth group, be like, yeah, we want to follow God, but what if he asks us to be a missionary in Africa? I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that.
It's like, so I want to follow him, but I'm scared of
On
what
my
he's going to
own
take me.
terms.
Yeah, on my own terms. And that's how a lot of us act. And that's how a lot of us behave is we recognize the power of the Lord. And that much power can be scary to us. And so when we talk about fear and we talk about the fears that hold us back from joy, yeah, there's fears about this world. There's fears about what could happen. That there can be worries about money or food or how we're going to get gas in our car, our house or, where we're going to live. And there are a lot of things that we can worry about, and some of them can be really legitimate. But I think the greatest fear that we have of all for many of us is actually going to God and fully following him. So, and we see that with the shepherds, when the shepherds are in the fields and they're just living their lives, like you said, they're used to this. They're out there, they're watching the flocks. And what happens? A heavenly host shows up.
Well, and we see a lot, especially in the Old Testament before, Jesus kind of allowed us a more personal relationship. The only people that really got that kind of like one-on-one time with even an angel were like the holiest of holy people, right? Like the best of the best, Moses, Joshua, these guys that were like the leaders. And so these shepherds who are just like nobodies out in a field, like they're just working class guys, to have a supernatural experience like this, to have a divine experience is very out of the norm, right?
Yeah.
Compared to what they've been taught from childhood of, Moses gets to talk to the, God, these guys, these are very set rules. And, the priests in the tabernacle, they can kind of sometimes interface with him, but, you were too unclean. You were not worthy enough to have an experience. So that's a whole nother layer of like, oh, we either really messed up or something weird.
Yeah.
It's not like, right? Like,
but I mean, that point you bring up is so interesting because do you know why Moses was the spokesman to the Israelites?
tell me.
Because when you read Exodus, when you go through the book and they are led out of Egypt, they're led out of Egypt and Moses is the one who acts, on behalf of God, him and Aaron. They speak to the people and Pharaoh. They get them out of Egypt. They cross the Red Sea. They get out to the desert. They go to Mount Sinai, which is, at that point is the mountain of the Lord because the Lord has decided this is where we're going to, figure this stuff out.
We're gonna make our covenant and figure it out.
This is where we're gonna do it. And they spent a long time there. They were there for like a year. You know, we all know about the 40 years in the desert. We all know about the leaving Egypt. But there's a time in between, like that's over a year long, where they're hanging out at Sinai.
Just waiting to figure out what's happening.
And the people are terrified of God. They had the opportunity. They could have, in the covenant with God, they could have talked to him and been like, hey, we want you. We want you in our lives. But they were like, no, please. Moses is like, hey, anybody want? Nope. You go up there.
You go up to the scary mountain with all the lightning and
with all the lightning and smoke. That thing, yeah. You go up there. We're gonna stay here. Yeah. We're good.
We're good.
It's all good. Yep.
We've actually been looking into crafting a bowl.
Yeah, you go. We're thinking about a little calf over here. Aaron's got us. You go hang out with the big scary cloud that's talking to you.
Right.
They were terrified of God. They were scared. And that's in Exodus, the people who have been led out of Egypt, who've been saved from slavery and captivity. And not only that, but they become decently wealthy off of it too.
Well, because they inherit, or God basically puts it on the Egyptians' hearts to give them all this wealth as they're leaving. They're like, just go take all of this stuff, get out.
Yeah,
we
imagine
don't want
if you were at some awful job and God's like shows up. He's like, hey, I'm going to get you out of here. We're going to get you into a great place to work purely for me. And we're going to get you a severance that's worth 5 years of salary. You know, and what's the Israelites' reaction to all this? They are terrified because God can be scary, and it's okay for us to recognize that. It's okay for us to recognize that the creator of the universe, upon which all of our life depends, you know, and who has sent his son and who loves us, is also, you know, very scary sometimes, you know, in that great power that he has.
There's so many points where, whether it's David, the psalmist, or other writers talking about, our first reaction anytime we think of God should just be to fall on our knees in fear and trembling, right? Like that is a phrase that's used so many times. And we, as a Western culture, kind of take it for granted. We're like, well, Jesus is, he's fighting for us. We can just kind of...
Jesus is just that skinny guy with that nice beard and that sundress. It's great.
And he's the one that, you know, we don't have to be afraid anymore. He's got us covered. But it's like, no, like, God's still scary.
Well, you don't have to be afraid of anything else.
Right. Like, yeah. And so I think I love this point you're bringing up of like, it's really easy for us to just kind of be like, it's Christmas, everything's supposed to be happy. God's always in our corner. And he is always in our corner, even in that same section when he's talking to Moses. And this is a really great characteristic of God, where he's talking about, he says, I am a jealous God. And it's like, if you worship another God besides me for 3 to 4 generations after you, you will be punished. But someone who loves me and follows me for 1,000 generations, they will be blessed. And so it's like, God doesn't say, you know, you're good, I love you no matter what, which he does, but he's also like, but you got to love me back. This is not a one-sided relationship. And he does instill basically some rules and consequences of, if you're not stepping up and putting your time in and showing that I am your one and only, I can also be not a very nice, you know, it's kind of like parenting, right? Like,
well, he's a God of love. He's also a God of justice.
Yes.
You know, and that balance is something that, you know, a lot of us talk about, you know, when we talk about why there's evil in the world and all of these things. But, you know, it's important for us to realize that approaching God is something that can be scary, and that we as humans who are flawed and sinful and who have been raised in this world that doesn't want us to know God, it is a scary thing to go to God. And it's important for us to realize that, because there's no way for us to overcome that fear, to overcome that scariness without admitting it's there. We have to recognize it's there. But listen to what the shepherds do. Listen to what their story is. Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger. Suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. Again, this is something that is good. We know this is good. We read this story, and this is an incredible thing. It's also very scary for the shepherds. But how do the shepherds respond? When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. See, the shepherds here make an incredible decision. Instead of letting the fear overcome them, which, I mean, yeah, the angel said, do not be afraid. But that's, you can still be afraid.
You're still probably going to be afraid.
I remember this one time when I was in middle school. We had been in basketball tryouts, and this one kid, he really wanted to make the varsity team, but he wasn't quite good enough. He didn't make it. And he was in the locker room. He was really sad afterward. He was crying a little bit, and everybody there like really felt for him. And so the biggest guy, who's a football player, who's just this tank, goes up to him, and the nicest way he can is like, "Hey, it's fine. You're going to be okay." But he does it in this tone. He's doing his best, but it's so like intimidating still. And it did not help at all. And I'm just like, that's kind of what the angel probably is like. It's like, do not be afraid. And you're like, I am still very
afraid now.
Yes, I am now more afraid. And so the shepherds, we read this, we're like, oh, great. The angel said, don't be afraid. Why would you be afraid? It's like, well, I mean, there's still that opportunity for them to be afraid. But despite that, and then, all these other angels show up and start singing, and they're like, what's going on? Like, that is an amazing, but also in some ways a terrifying experience, especially with like what you talked about where, if with any Jewish background, which living in Bethlehem, they probably had a Jewish background, that is a scary thing to experience, the Lord, to experience his glory and power. But what do? They make the decision to not allow that to affect them. They make the decision that, yes, this is a scary thing, but it's also a good thing. And so I'm going to choose the good part of it. And even though I might still be scared, I'm going to go try to experience this and figure it out. And they go into Bethlehem. Well,
and they don't know what to expect. Like the angels are not like, they say, the Messiah is born, he's here, but like, they're probably expecting he's maybe in a palace, or because like the idea back then was the Messiah was going to come in basically as this king, this like glorious figure. And so they're kind of going in, and I would be thinking, well, he's probably locked behind some door, and like there's probably a host of angels also protecting him, and like it's like trying to go and see like some celebrity's baby basically, right? Like there's security everywhere, and it's like it turns out he's just in a manger because there was no room for him even in just like a broke down inn, like that he's out in a barn basically. And so it's like their expectations are constantly being changed, right? Of what it is, but they have the courage to go out and be like, well, we were told he's here, and even though it's super scary and we don't know what to expect, we're still going to go forward and go see what it is that they have told us.
They make that decision to go. And what are the effects of this? In verse 16, so they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby, who was lying in a manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. And so we see here that the shepherds are confronted at the beginning of this story with something that is scary, that they are terrified of. It says explicitly they were terrified. That is where they start off. They are terrified. And what are they terrified of? They are terrified of the messenger of the Lord, something that is good. So something that is good, something that is bringing joy, the Messiah, Christ, his birth and the surrounding circumstances and glory of God terrify the shepherds. That is where they start off with this. But they take the steps to go explore it, to seek God in it, to see what is going on here. I want to find out, despite the initial fear and despite what could be very scary, and they're not 100% sure. I mean, according to the Bible, all the angel said is, this will be the sign to you. You'll find a baby wrapped in cloth and lying in a manger. And they're like, that's not a lot to go off.
Right.
And Bethlehem probably wasn't the biggest town, but that's still like, okay, interesting. We're going to go try. So it's not like they were like, hey, go, it's not a GPS. Take three turns here, go down this street, look at here. Oh, and that's where it is. It's, it's a little bit more ambiguous than that. But despite all that, they go and seek it. They go and search for it. And they end up not only having great joy themselves, they worship the Lord, they praise him for all these amazing things they've seen and heard, but the people in Bethlehem who hear this are amazed, and Mary treasures up all of these things in her heart. It brings joy not just to themselves, but to those around them.
Well, and it's kind of like it's a longer lasting joy, right? Like that phrase of treasuring these things up in your heart, you're like kind of storing them away. It's something that's going to last you rather than kind of an ephemeral
or
just
true
a
joy.
temporary.
It's not happiness.
Yeah.
It's not happiness. It's not temporary. It's a joy. It's a joy, something that is long lasting, that does not go away. And so that's what we're going to try to talk about a little bit, this Sunday, when we're talking more specifically about joy and fear and how that fear can prevent us from experiencing the joy, is that Jesus being born, Jesus being God, Jesus having a relationship with us is an objectively good thing. It is something that brings us joy, that brings us happiness, that it's both temporary and, sustainable. It's an amazing and it's a good thing. But our fear of him can prevent us from taking those steps.
Well, and, we never hear about these shepherds again, right? Like they're in this chapter, but you have to imagine like that experience changed them, right? That joy, that fear of, do you guys remember the time all the angels appeared to us and were singing and telling us?
I mean, it's got to be great at dinner parties,
right? Like
when someone's talking about their story, they're like, I might have a story that's a little bit better.
I think I can beat you.
I attended the Angels choir practice. Right. It was kind of cool.
But then it's like that joy had to have been transformational for them for the rest of their lives. Of we were some of the first people to go and see the Messiah, and heartbreaking that they may have seen him go through what he had to in the end too. Like we don't have their story. It's not in the Bible, but you have to imagine that what happened to Jesus got spread through the country afterwards, and so it's like they have to have been like. We saw him at the beginning, and we've now heard about what has happened to him at the end, and then probably had also heard about his resurrection, which is another form of joy that they could thrive on. But it's just like, I think it's so easy in this like very celebrity focused culture of ways people, especially in these charismatic kind of churches, where it's like, oh, that person, that pastor, he's so much better than I am. And it's like time after time after time, God comes to the lowliest of people and they get to have the best joy. And so it's like when you see and read these stories, I guess what I want to share is like, don't think that you are not capable of getting that same kind of joy. This joy that Jesus brings to you is not reserved for the best of the best Christians or, the mega church pastors or whatever. This is the same joy that you and I can have, the newest Christian and the oldest Christian can have. That this joy is for everyone. It's not for just a select few, which is amazing because that's different than almost every other religion. It's like every other religion basically puts you in a ranking or a hierarchical order of like, you get this if you do these things and these acts, you get to this level. I mean, and this is a very different way of approaching things. God says, no, I love you all, and I want you all to experience this joy.
Well, we see so many of the stories of people who interact with Jesus are people who have a reason to be afraid or have a reason to have distance between them and him.
Lepers, prostitutes, tax collectors.
Zacchaeus, all of his disciples, and they overcome fear, they overcome self-doubt, they overcome self-pity, they overcome all these things, and they decide, I'm going to seek him. His disciples leave whatever business or whatever livelihood they have to follow him.
Well, and they constantly see him do these works, and almost after every great miracle he does, like he calms the waves, and it usually ends that chapter with, and they were afraid.
Yeah, they're
asking
like, who is
this
this
right?
guy?
It's like all the time. They're constantly overcoming their fears because they're like, this guy is doing one major miracle after another, and they're constantly like, what is going on? And it's like this constant fear, and then they go into sections of just amazing rapturous joy of like, we get to be with this guy who's doing these amazing works, right? So well, I know that us and probably all of our listeners are really excited for you to delve into this more on Sunday. Zac will be preaching and talking to us more about fear and joy, and just overall, we want to encourage you guys to be joyful this season. There's so many reasons that everyone wants to tell you why this Christmas isn't going to be very good, whether it's you can't get this thing because of supply chain issues, or, if you're listening to future people, if you're listening to this, we're still in the middle of coronavirus. You still might be in the middle of coronavirus in your time, who knows? But, there's so many reasons why everyone wants to tell you this isn't going to be a joyful season. And we here at the Salty Pastor, from myself and Zach and Pastor Doug and our staff here at Foothills and just the church as a whole, want to tell you there's plenty of reason to be joyful. And the primary reason, his name's Jesus, and he wants you to have real, true, authentic joy. There may be points where you're not overly happy, but that's not what the point of joy is. The point is to have a true, eternal joy that you can only get through Jesus. So we encourage you guys to focus on that this season. If you're not in doing the Advent study with us, do an Advent study. If you're not doing our Advent study, do any kind of Advent study, because your study of Jesus and understanding why he came to help you is going to help you in your growth and your walk so much more, especially as you get closer to his birth and celebrating that. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you on Thursday. Pastor Doug will be back on the desk to talk a little bit more about how some of these things apply to our modern day stuff. And it's just going to be such a great week here on the Salty Pastor Podcast. Thank you so much, Zach, for joining us, and we'll see you on Sunday here at Foothills Christian Church.